Gameoverse is finally here, and after letting my first watch settle in a little bit and then revisiting it again, I think I'm finally ready to give my first thoughts on it. The first trailer for this, I think, was almost a little bit misleading, just with the way it presented what the story was supposed to be about. You know, I'm speaking as someone who has next to no knowledge about Rubber Ross, the show's creator. That almost made me anticipate it even more, and I was really pleasantly surprised with what we got. And of course, there's already been a whole lot of other discussion videos and hot takes, good and bad, about the show. However, as always, I think I've got some unique thoughts to throw into the ring. I'll discuss the events of the show's pilot, share my thoughts with you, and hopefully we can get a pretty good discussion going in the comments down below. And real quick, thank you guys so much for your questions on that Q&A. That was really fun to do. And you know, maybe at our next milestone we'll do another one. So be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. And if you really want to support me and the team behind this channel, consider joining our Patreon. We give out shoutouts, we've got a community Discord, and you can even score yourself a little illustrated portrait. But yeah, enough of the plug-in. Let's get down to business. So just for a little bit of background, as I mentioned already, this show was created by Rubber Ross, an animator here on YouTube. The guy's been trying to get this show greenlit forever now and has been shot down at pretty much every turn. Now, I haven't been following this guy very closely, but I am very happy that he's finally managed to get his dream realized. I did go and watch the original Gameoverse shorts from like 2009, and man, the story is just so much different. Speaking of which, the story of Gameoverse, the current Glitch show, and really, you should have watched it already, because like at the time of me posting this, it just came out, but just in case you need a refresher, this series takes place in a multiverse in which all the planets are, in essence, their own video games, aptly titled game worlds, with all of them having a fated main protagonist and antagonist, as most games do. However, when a game world's win condition is met, typically when the hero beats the villain, it falls apart and ceases to be. This happened to our main character Kit, accompanied by her sentient one-eyed backpack Caboodle, who kinda looks like me. It's a little scary, with the two of them now working for an organization known as the Farcade to try and prevent heroes from defeating their game world's villains, saving countless lives in the process. Can I just say the animation here is absolutely spectacular. Kudos to literally everybody who worked on this, because man, I'm just loving the style. Anyways, en route to a recon mission, Kit, Caboodle, and Gobbles— oh wait, I forgot to talk about Gobbles. See, now here's where I start to have a little bit of a problem. Now, some of you might not even be aware of this, but Glitch released a trailer for Gameoverse a few months before this episode came out, as they ought to. However, the first minute of it is what establishes Gobbles' backstory, with him being yet another main protagonist of a game world that ended up falling victim to, you know, him winning. But here in this episode, they just talk about that as if you've already watched the trailer. And granted, while I'm sure a huge subset of the audience watching this episode has seen the trailer, I can't help but feel like the entire first opening scene with Kit's backstory could have been an extended version of Gobbles's? I don't know. As you'll come to see with this pilot, my main criticism of it is that some of the pacing feels a little bit rushed. And there's a part of me that feels like the minutes spent focusing on Kit's PTSD in the first episode when we've barely gotten to know her could have been completely avoided if you just showed us Gobble's backstory at the beginning of the episode and then maybe waited to show us Kit's. But maybe that's just me. Anywho, the real fun begins when Syntax shows up, a group of bad guys led by the dastardly Warwick, accompanied by two characters who I can only describe as this show's Jesse and James, Fold and Misinformation. These are my favorite characters already. Their dynamic is great, and they're fucking hilarious, and they genuinely they stole the show in the best way. I think what I'm gathering with these two is that they're like defective tutorial characters, and you can really see that with Misinformation. I mean, look what she's doing right here. She's like a fucking Omo Chow screen. Right after this scene, though, they strike down the ship that our main characters are heading towards the game world in, and Caboodle is separated from the group. I've seen some people call into question why they'd split up Kit and Caboodle in the first episode like this, but honestly, I feel like it communicates to the audience that they work independently from one another, you know? And that's a really good thing, considering there are two main protagonists, and Gobbles, I guess. Caboodle then gets swallowed up by this game world's main villain, while Kit and Gobbles try to figure out how to find him. And considering this is a huge body of water with sandy beaches and stuff, Kit immediately changes into a bikini after scrolling through a bunch of outfits, which I'm sure totally will not be made into a series of plush keychains. Fold and Misinformation also land at the same time, and Misinformation also changes into a bikini. Why am I calling attention to this, you may ask? Well, because there's some people that have criticized the show for this. You know, calling it goon bait or whatever. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I don't like using the word Puritan because, I'm gonna be real, every time I'm seeing that word, it's being used by just the biggest chud.
What's a chud?
Cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller.
But there certainly are people overblowing this a lot. Women should be able to exist in animation without you assigning sexuality to it. And you can criticize something or even dislike a decision made about the show without trying to have some moral commentary about it. Although I do like to at least try to find the merit in criticisms like this instead of just writing it off. So allow me to try to put myself in the shoes of these critics for a moment. It is a little funny, I suppose, that the two most important women in this show spend the vast majority of it in bikinis. You know, like we see them like that more than we see them in their main outfits. So I suppose if you think about it that way, I can understand why someone may raise an eyebrow, especially considering this is the first episode. But to go as far as to call it goon bait it's a little disingenuous. What I will point out though is that people gave way more shit to Planetronica because Butterfly just existed and did a little dance. And I think that's mean and unfair, and y'all should watch Planetronica because I really liked that. Kit and Gobbles meet the main protagonist of this world, Flappers, while Caboodle helps Snappers, the main antagonist, get strong enough to beat Flappers. This whole sequence of the show is where the music really shines, I think, which was composed by the one and only Grant Kirkhope. When this was announced, I just completely lost my mind. I mean, this guy basically composed my childhood. I know it sounds crazy coming from a guy so young, but just watch my damn Q&A video if you want an explanation on that, alright? Full transparency though, it's taken a lot in me to not be kind of cynical about the fact that Flappers' main leitmotif is like a reference, because the fact that Grant Kirkhope was a part of this at all is just so cool. Something else that I don't really see people talking about very much is how the environments in this world are genuinely laid out like an actual level in a game. Like, even though you've got the dynamic camera angles and everything, you can genuinely imagine what Flappers the Super Dolphin would be like as a traditional video game. It's kind of making me hope that Glitch will do a glitch carts thing again, and maybe actually make some of these games playable for real. Just bring me flashbacks to when I got jump scared by seeing my own username in the YouTube short because I was on the leaderboard. Put that on the ronbrazy iceberg, why don't you? So yeah, Fold's whole scheme here is to give Flappers as much advice as possible for every single boss in this world to make things a breeze for him, because that would result in the world ending, just like the evil Warwick wants. But when Kit catches on to this, she tries to tell Flappers the truth about the Gameoverse, which causes everything to go all evil and scary and shit. I mean, look at that. This is a good opportunity for me to explain what I said at the beginning of the video and also why the thumbnail is like that, because the trailer for this show really does make it look like it's gonna be a Pibby thing, and like the static eyes and all this shit going on in this scene just really embodies that as well. And I was not alone in that belief either. I mean, look at this image. This is the kind of shit people were posting whenever Gameoverse got announced. Must be a Pibby glitch. Safe to say though that everybody was completely wrong, at least in my opinion. I don't really see much overlap now that I have all the context of what this is supposed to be, unless you really stretch it. Now, another interesting thing that happens here that I only really noticed on rewatch, Fold walks up to Kit and he's all like, "Yo, yes, you don't stand a chance without your backpack," and Kit's like, "Oh, how would you know?" And I was like, oh wait, is the paper at the beginning, like with the flashback, meant to be Fold? That's wild. Part of me thinks that Fold might actually be from Kit's game world. Like, I know it could have very well been another syntax mission, but if that were the case, then I don't see what the point would be in having this be a detail to lay out for the audience, you know what I mean? Here's my first prediction of the day. I think Fold is gonna end up being redeemed by the end of this show. I don't know, that's just a feeling I'm getting. Needless to say though, Kit doesn't end up convincing Flappers of anything, and he leaves with Fold. And Kit's all upset and she drops to the ground, and this is just like the worst scene in the pilot, I think. I know that sounds really harsh, but just like Gobbles out of nowhere just gives this really ham-fisted, encouraging speech to Kit, and it's like, where the hell is this coming from? We've known these characters for all of 20 minutes. Personally, I just don't think this is an appropriate time to do this. Like, you haven't earned it yet. Especially because nothing's fucking happened. More egregious than that, though, is the fact that Gobbles' personality does a 180 in this scene, and the show acknowledges it. Like, Kit's like, "How did you get so courageous?" Gobbles says, "I'm a learnosaurus. I learn. It's what I do." Fucking when, man? You didn't do anything. You've done nothing this whole time. It's what I mean when I say, like, I feel this episode is banking on you having seen the trailer, because otherwise, why would I give a fuck? If I hadn't seen the trailer, I wouldn't know where this guy comes from. I wouldn't know anything about him besides just the exposition laid out in the first, what, 3 minutes of the episode? But I digress. Kit and Caboodle finally reunite, and we get this really big, crazy fight scene in Snapper's lair. And like everything else, the animation was really cool. I know I said this about the quote-unquote level design earlier, but the way that Flappers beats Snappers here is literally exactly how a platformer boss would be beaten too. Like, I can see the gimmicks and stuff being laid out exactly how a game like that would, and I think that's a really neat detail. But yeah, as the world starts to end because, you know, Snappers lost, they finally have the opportunity to tell Flappers the truth, and he leaves with them back out to the ship. Meanwhile, while trying to recruit Snappers, we finally get to see what the point of all this was for Warwick. And to me, this was the most fascinating part of the episode. This is where my brain kind of started going a little bit. So walk with me for a second, because it's theory time. Warwick says to Snappers that with the energy from the destroyed game world, which I think is called Float, Syntax will be able to change the rules of the Gameoverse and bring back all that they've lost. Warwick even calls the rules of the Gameoverse cruel and unfair, before immediately speed blitzing this goof. I mean, like, Jesus. It's about time indie animation fans got something they could reasonably power scale. You know what I mean? I'm getting real sick and tired of people trying to pit Kane against Monica. I mean, neither of these characters do any fighting. It doesn't make any sense. Now, I know there's a lot of villains who have these kind of noble causes and, you know, the ends justify the means kind of outlook on life. But what's interesting to me is that his end goal is to bring them all back. Now, granted, you could interpret this as only the worlds of these villains, but consider this for a second. Assuming you believe that Warwick is the one who founded Syntax, how could he have been the main villain of a game world if logically the win condition would have been to beat him? I can't help but feel like these noble aspirations of this character, tied with the fact that he must have somehow escaped the destruction of his own game world, makes me think that maybe in the past he was the main protagonist of his game world, the hero, and is now on this incredibly misguided journey to try to bring everything back to how it was before. And I think that would make him an incredible foil for Kit, now that I'm thinking about it, who's constantly having these flashbacks of the world she came from and is seeing herself and others, which makes me think of the way Warwick tries to appeal to Snappers by being like, look what just happened to your world. Isn't that so unfair? Don't you wish you could do something about that? This is clearly a show that is going to try and play a lot with the role of heroes and villains in video games, almost like Wreck-It Ralph did. But by making Warwick a jaded ex-hero, they could have a lot of fun with that, I think. Which brings me to talking about this Dusk character. So take this as kind of like a 2-in-1 theory prediction thing. This guy is the leader of the Farcade, and presumably its founder as well. Now, one would think that he would resemble an iconic video game protagonist, no? Like maybe Super Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog or something. But Dusk bears a striking resemblance to Sephiroth of Final Fantasy. And yes, I know what I just said about Warwick, but somehow, some way, I feel like it'd be insane if Dusk ended up being the main villain of whatever game world he originated from. It added interesting layer to the conflict. I feel like there's gonna be some people in the comments that'd be like, oh, that's too predictable, whatever. And you know what? That's a fair criticism. I can see how it could be. But if executed right, that could make for some great TV, even though it's all on YouTube, but you get the point. I don't necessarily think that they're gonna do the whole thing where, oh, Dusk and Warwick came from the same game world and now they started their own organizations, but it's not off the table. I don't think it's 100% implausible. I really would like to get y'all's thoughts on that, because there's so many directions they could take this, and that's one of the things I like the most about it. I think this series effectively sets the stage for what's to come in a good way. An important thing to remember is that Glitch does not do pilots how they ought to be done. They always double as the first episode, so you kind of have to judge it from both angles. But yeah, anyway, Warwick tells Metal Kit, or whatever, that she can finally get her revenge now, and the episode ends off right there. So when I started on making this video, I kind of thought that I would recap the events of the show first and then get into all my thoughts after, but I ended up sprinkling them in as I went over the whole episode. So I guess now it's just time for me to give some closings, I guess. I've been avoiding talking about Arin Hanson this entire time because that is a beehive I hate to poke. You know, I tried discussing controversy on this channel before, especially when it comes to Glitch Productions, and it just invites a lot of people who don't like to discuss nuance, because people these days are obsessed with either hate, defend. It's like, come on, guys. Multiple things can be true at once. Arin Hanson's past is troublesome for sure, and I don't blame anybody for not really wanting to get near this show because he's involved with it. For me though, while I'm not over here jumping for joy over Arin fucking Hanson being on a Glitch show, I'm gonna try my best to give the guy the benefit of the doubt, since in my opinion anyway, he's shown a lot of growth and he's talked about his past a lot publicly in a way that seems genuine. If there's any context I'm missing though, feel free to educate me. I don't like like writing off people's perspectives, especially when they present it in a way that's attempting to have a conversation and not just attack somebody. You guys know the kind of community I'm striving to foster here. But when it comes to the pilot itself, it's not perfect, and I wasn't expecting it to be, like that's unrealistic. But the big thing here is the pacing, you know? And just the fact that there was no thought put into integrating Gobbles into this story effectively, in my opinion. Like the whole kind of cold open of this show is about Kit's origin story and showing us what happens when a hero wins on a game world. And then they cut to the ship and we see the two characters that we just saw fighting and then this purple dude. And they're like, oh yeah, it happened to him too, by the way. That's not very smart, in my opinion. I gotta give a lot of praise to the voice actors. Erica Lindbeck was incredible as Kit this entire episode. There's this one line of dialogue in the ship where she's like, he's very good at reading and writing. And that scene lives in my head rent free. Like the delivery on that was great. Schlatt as Caboodle, fucking S-tier casting. The robot filter is a little bit bad, honestly, to the point where there are people on my timeline talking about, oh, why is his mic so shit? I just think whoever's doing the effect chains here on the vocals needs to lock in, man, because it even sounds better on the international dubs. I know I was just ragging on Arin Hanson, but I really don't want to have to listen to Gobbles and Flappers for 7 to 8 more fucking episodes. I think if these are gonna continue to be main characters, which at the very least Gobbles will continue to be, please approach it a little differently. Kit and Caboodle's voices sound relatively natural, and then you've got Gobbles here who is far more explicitly cartoony in the voice, and I feel like I'm gonna get really annoyed of that, especially if you've got Flappers on top of that. Just, oh my god, please, shut the fuck up. I don't want to glaze the villains any more than I already have, but dude, Chris Sabat as Warwick is peak. Fold and Misinformation's voices were incredible too. All around just great. Despite my problems with it, I think this has sold me on the show, more so than something like Knights of Guinevere. I know there's a lot of people that'll probably put their pitchforks up to me for saying that, but I don't think the Knights of Guinevere pilot was bad in any way. I just think the premise is not necessarily up my alley, just conceptually, and the pilot didn't necessarily do the greatest job of convincing me that it is something I'd be interested in, although I will still watch it, just on the premise that it's an indie animated series. One thing I'll say as well is that I'm really hoping we get to see more characters that have a bit more distinct silhouettes, specifically with the women. I won't get into the whole like goon bait topic again because it's so tiring, but just from a perspective of distinct silhouettes in character design. It's just not a good idea to give every woman the same body type. Like, you look at something like the Amazing Digital Circus. There's not a chance in hell you confuse any one of those characters for one another if you just have their silhouettes, except for maybe Kinger and Queenie. Maybe. But those make sense to be exceptions. And, you know, all the male characters in Gameoverse have incredibly distinct silhouettes. The only exception for the women is Crab Girl. And that's like a joke character. I don't think we're ever going to see her again. However, there's more than enough time for them to introduce more women, so I'm not gonna sit here and make any judgment calls just yet. I'm just pointing it out to you guys. I think the show could shape out to be something super duper cool, especially with the stuff I pointed out about Warwick and Dusk. It should also be noted that in the original Gameoverse series, Gobbles and Flappers were actually tricked by the benevolent figure telling them they're on some valiant journey. So just keep that in mind with the predictions I made earlier. One last thing I'm kind of grateful for as well, this doesn't seem to me anyway like the type of cartoon that's begging for 1,000,001 film theory episodes. Which, you know, why the fuck are you complaining, ronbrazy? I thought you make discussion videos about cartoons and video games and shit. Well, because I'm starting to get exhausted of that. I'm tired of everything being presented in such a way where it's like almost begging for there to be constant discourse around the story. Not to say there can't be mysteries, like there's definitely already mysteries in Gameoverse, but they're not as in your face as the constant exit doors in the Amazing Digital Circus or the Scott Cawthon level ring around the rosy storytelling of murder drones. And I'm speaking as someone who loves both of those shows, by the way. Kudos to you guys, Rubber Ross and Arin fucking Hanson. And above all else, I think it's just incredibly inspiring, you know? I scrolled down through the Gameoverse Twitter account for a long time, and the amount of dedication it takes to stick by an idea for this long until you can finally bring it to life is just so heartwarming. And while, yes, I have been critiquing it myself, it's kind of disheartening the way some people are going about their criticisms. I think it's just because everybody wants to have a hot take about everything. But I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, we always talk about the vision of the artist on this channel. It's slowly but surely becoming my gimmick. But if you're an artist out there, and I know a lot of you like to draw when you watch my videos, never give up. It might take 10 goddamn years, but that amount of dedication never ends up going to waste. That's all for today. Thanks for sticking around till the end. I also just like to give a huge thanks to our patrons, including Roscoe13 and
the one and only Drink of Doom, Serenity Solstice. You value Your dedication to the Brazy Empire will forever be cherished.
I know this video came out a little late, but as I mentioned on my community page, I was so busy and away from my computer after my birthday, you know, my May 9th birthday. And if you didn't wish me a happy birthday, you're a traitor. But we shall be getting back on track in the coming weeks. And I've got some really fun stuff in the works for you guys. So feel free to like and subscribe. Anyways, this has been ronbrazy, and I'll be seeing you all next time. Catch you later, y'all.